She didn't know that the man watching her from the doorway was the Alpha King. She didn't know that he had been searching for her his entire life. She didn't know that the golden thread she felt pulling in her chest every morning when she woke meant she was already his. All Lyra knew was hunger. The kitchen scraps were cold, bits of bread and meat that had fallen to the floor during the servants' hurried breakfast preparations. She knelt beside the waste bucket, her fingers quick and practised as she sorted through what might still be edible. Her stomach cramped with familiar emptiness, a constant companion these past months since she'd been cast out from her birth pack. The stone floor bit into her knees through the thin fabric of her borrowed dress, if it could even be called a dress. More like strips of cloth sewn together by someone who pitied her enough to keep her from nakedness, but not enough to give her dignity. "Please," she whispered to no one, finding a crust that wasn't entirely mouldy, just enough to make it through today. She'd learned to make these small bargains with fate, just enough, just today, never asking for tomorrow, because tomorrow felt impossibly far away for someone like her. The warmth hit her first. Not the sun, it was barely dawn, and the kitchen windows faced north. This was different. This was the kind of warmth that started in her chest and spread outward like honey in her veins, making her breath catch and her hands still on the waste bucket's edge. "What are you doing?" The voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made her spine go rigid. Lyra's head snapped up, her heart hammering against her ribs as she took in the man standing in the kitchen doorway. Tall, dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it. Eyes the colour of storm clouds, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made something in her chest flutter and twist. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, like lightning or wildfire or the edge of a cliff that promised either flight or falling. "I'm sorry." The words tumbled out of her as she scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping over her own inadequate skirts. "I know I shouldn't be here. I was hungry and I thought—" "When did you last eat?" The question stopped her mid-apology. She blinked at him, confusion momentarily overriding her panic. Nobody asked her questions like that. Nobody asked her anything, really, except to move out of the way or work faster or be quieter. Yesterday, I think, maybe the day before." She couldn't meet his eyes. They were too much, too intense, like looking directly into the sun. "I'm sorry, I'll clean this up and go—" "Come." She stared at him. "What?" "Come." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the doorway behind him. "You'll eat at my table." Lyra's laugh was sharp and bitter, the sound scraping her throat raw. "Your table? Sir, I think you're confused about what I am." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "What are you?" "Nothing." The word came out fiercer than she'd intended, but it was true. It was the truest thing about her. "I'm nothing. I'm a servant who can't even serve properly. I'm a wolf who barely has a wolf. I'm a person nobody wants around long enough to learn my name." "Lyra." Her breath stopped entirely. "How do you—" "Your name is Lyra." He said it like he was tasting something precious. "And you're wrong about what you are." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, so tight it nearly brought her to her knees. She pressed a hand to her sternum, trying to breathe around the sudden, overwhelming sensation that this man, this stranger, was important in a way that terrified her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't have to." He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, pine and rain and something wild that made her wolf stir for the first time in months. "Not yet. But you're going to come with me, and you're going to eat, and you're going to let someone take care of you for once." "I can't." The protest was automatic, born of months of being told she was a burden, a mistake, a problem to be hidden away. I don't deserve—" "You deserve everything." The words hit her like a physical blow. She actually stepped back, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the wall. "You don't know me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know enough." His voice was gentle now, patient in a way that made tears burn behind her eyes. I know you're hungry and you're tired and you've been taking care of yourself for far too long. I know you're standing in my kitchen before dawn, picking through scraps because nobody has bothered to make sure you have food. Your kitchen? The pieces clicked together slowly, horror and mortification washing over her in cold waves. Oh, goddess, you're him. You're the Alpha King. She dropped to her knees so fast she felt something pop in her left one. Her head bowed so low her forehead nearly touched the stones. Your Majesty, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I never would have. Please, I'll go immediately. I'll leave the castle. I'll... Stand up. Your Majesty. Stand up, Lyra. Something in his voice made her obey before her mind could catch up. She rose on shaking legs but kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Warm fingers touched her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. This close, she could see golden flecks in the storm grey of his eyes, could feel the calluses on his fingertips, could smell that wild scent that made her wolf whimper with longing. My name is Adrian, he said quietly, and I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you come and eat at my table? The sensible part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive these past months, screamed at her to refuse, to run, to find somewhere else to be before she caused trouble for the one person who'd shown her kindness in longer than she could remember. But the golden thread in her chest was singing now, vibrating with a frequency that felt like coming home, and when she looked into Adrian's eyes, she saw something she'd forgotten existed. Hope. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Your Majesty. Adrian, he corrected gently. When it's just us, call me Adrian. And as he led her from the kitchen toward whatever came next, Lyra wondered if she was dreaming, because surely this couldn't be real. Surely kings didn't kneel in doorways watching servants steal scraps. Surely they didn't invite broken girls to their tables and look at them like they mattered. But Adrian's hand was warm and steady on her elbow, and the golden thread in her chest had never felt stronger, and for the first time in months Lyra dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't nothing after all. The dining hall was impossibly vast. Lyra stood frozen in the doorway, her bare feet suddenly feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds each. The table could have seated 50 people easily, its polished surface reflecting the morning light streaming through windows tall enough to make her neck ache just looking up at them. And there, at the head of it all, was a single place setting. "I can't," she breathed, taking a step back toward the door. This is wrong. I shouldn't be here." Adrian moved past her, pulling out the chair to his right, not across from him, but close. Close enough that she could smell that pine and rain scent that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. "You're exactly where you should be." She shook her head, panic rising in her throat like bile. "You don't understand. I'm not... People like me don't eat in places like this. I eat in the kitchens or outside or standing up in corners where no one has to look at me." "People like you?" The question was quiet, but something in his tone made her flinch. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look. Unwashed hair, borrowed clothes that hung like rags, dirt under her fingernails from kneeling on the kitchen floor. "Outcasts," she whispered. "Banished wolves, servants who can't even serve properly because they shake too much when people look at them." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his storm-grey eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to hide. Then he pulled out his own chair and sat down heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. "My parents died when I was 8, he said simply. Lyra blinked, confusion cutting through her panic. "What?" "Rogues attacked during a hunting trip. My father, the former Alpha King, he threw himself between my mother and their claws. She died trying to protect his body." Adrian's voice was steady, but something flickered across his features. Old pain, carefully buried. "I became king at 8 years old, and I've been sitting at this table alone for 23 years. The confession hit her like a physical blow. She found herself taking a step forward, then another, until she was standing beside the chair he'd pulled out for her. At every meal, he continued, not looking at her now, but at the empty expanse of table stretching out before them. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment that should have been shared, I've sat here by myself and pretended it didn't matter. Adrian. His name slipped out before she could stop it, soft and aching. So when I ask you to sit with me, he said, finally meeting her eyes, it's not charity, it's not pity, it's... He stopped, jaw working like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. It's the first time in 23 years that this table might actually feel like what it's supposed to be. What's it supposed to be? Home. The golden thread in her chest pulled so tight she gasped, her hand flying to her sternum. For a moment the world tilted sideways, and all she could see were Adrian's eyes, dark and endless, and full of something that looked impossibly like longing. Then a servant appeared at Adrian's elbow. When had he arrived? Setting down plates laden with food that smelled better than anything Lyra had encountered in months. Fresh bread, still warm, eggs that glistened with butter, meat that actually looked like meat instead of the scraps and gristle she was used to. "Thank you, Marcus," Adrian said to the servant, who bowed and disappeared as quietly as he'd come. Lyra stared at the food, her stomach cramping with desperate hunger, but her hands remained frozen in her lap. "I don't know how," she admitted quietly. "How to what?" "How to eat at a table, how to sit in a chair like this, how to—" She gestured helplessly at the gleaming silverware, the cloth napkin, the crystal glass filled with what looked like actual orange juice. "How to be the kind of person who belongs in a place like this." Adrian reached across the small space between them, his fingers brushing hers where they twisted in her skirt. The touch sent warmth shooting up her arm, and she had to bite back a gasp. "You eat," he said simply. "However feels right to you. There's no wrong way. But the rules... I'm the king." Something almost like amusement flickered in his eyes. "I make the rules, and I say you can eat however you want." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made panic bloom fresh in her chest. "You're the king," she repeated, the words coming out strangled. "You're the Alpha King, and I'm sitting at your table in rags, and I don't even know your last name, and everyone's going to think—" "Lyra?" His voice cut through her spiralling thoughts, gentle but firm. "Breathe." She tried, she really did. But the air felt too thin, and the room was too big, and she was just a cast-out wolf who'd been eating scraps off the floor 20 minutes ago. "Tell me about the banishment." The words were quiet, but they hit her like a slap. She went perfectly still, her eyes wide and locked on his face. "What? You said you were banished." Adrian's voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath it now. "Tell me what happened." "I can't." The words came out broken. "I can't talk about it." "Did you do what they accused you of?" "No." The answer was immediate, fierce. "No, I would never—" She stopped, pressing her lips together until they went white. "Then tell me." For a moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, the words began to tumble out. "They said I stole from the pack treasury, a family heirloom, a necklace that had been passed down for generations. It went missing, and they found it in my things." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I'd never seen it before in my life. I swear to you, I had never even been in the same room as something that valuable." "But they didn't believe you." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "My wolf was always weak. I was always different. Smaller, slower, quieter. They'd been looking for a reason to get rid of me for years, and someone finally gave them one." "Who found it? The necklace?" "My cousin." The words tasted like ash. "Beta Marcus's daughter. She was the one who suggested they search my things. She was the one who gasped and pointed when they pulled it out of my sleeping furs." Understanding dawned in Adrian's eyes, dark and terrible. "She put it there." "I couldn't prove it." Lyra's voice cracked. "And even if I could have, who was going to believe me over the Beta's daughter? I was nobody. I had nobody, so they stripped me of my pack bonds and threw me out with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. How long ago? 6 months. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, hating herself for crying in front of him. I've been moving from place to place ever since, trying to find work, trying to find somewhere to belong. But word travels fast about banished wolves. Nobody wants to take a chance on someone who might be a thief. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth. "What's your cousin's name?" he asked finally. "Why?" "Because I'm going to destroy her." The words were said so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Lyra a moment to process them. When she did, she felt something hot and dangerous unfurl in her chest. "You can't," she whispered. "You don't even know if I'm telling the truth." "I know." His eyes met hers, steady and certain. "I can scent truth from lies, Lyra, and everything you just told me rings clear as a bell. But her pack has an alliance with yours. You can't just—" "I can do whatever I want." The authority in his voice was absolute, unshakable. "I'm the king." Something in her chest stuttered and soared at the same time. Nobody had ever believed her. Nobody had ever even listened to her side of the story. And here was Adrian, the Alpha King, ready to go to war for her based on nothing but her word. "Why?" she breathed. "Why what? Why do you believe me? Why are you being kind to me? Why are you—" She gestured at the food, the table, the impossible luxury surrounding them. "Why are you doing any of this?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Because," he said quietly, "I've been waiting my whole life for you to walk through that door." The golden thread in her chest sang. Before she could ask what he meant, Marcus reappeared with fresh coffee and what looked like pastries that were still steaming from the oven. This time Lyra noticed the way he bowed to Adrian, but also the way his eyes lingered on her, not with judgment, but with curiosity, and maybe, if she wasn't imagining it, approval. "Will there be anything else, Your Majesty?" Marcus asked. "We're fine for now, thank you." Adrian's eyes never left Lyra's face. "But Marcus, make sure word gets out that Lady Lyra will be dining with me regularly. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it directly to me. Lady Lyra." The words hit her like lightning, sending shock waves through every nerve ending. "Adrian," she whispered, as Marcus bowed and disappeared again. "I'm not— You can't call me that. I'm not a lady. I'm not anything." "You're mine." The words were out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them like something tangible. Adrian's eyes went wide, as if he was as surprised as she was that he'd said them. "I mean—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "I mean, you're under my protection now. You're safe here. That makes you whatever I say you are." But Lyra had heard the first version, and the golden thread in her chest was vibrating so hard she thought it might shatter her ribs. "Eat," Adrian said quietly, his voice rougher than before. "Please, before it gets cold." This time she picked up the fork. The dress was blue. Not just any blue, the deep, rich blue of a summer sky at twilight, with threads of silver woven through the bodice that caught the light when she moved. It fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for her body specifically, and when Lyra looked at herself in the mirror that had been brought to her new chambers, she barely recognised the woman staring back at her. She looked possible. Adrian sent it, the maid had explained when she delivered it that morning, along with soft undergarments, stockings that didn't have holes, and shoes that actually fit. He said the blue would bring out your eyes. Now, standing in the palace gardens where Adrian had asked her to meet him, Lyra felt like she was wearing someone else's skin. The dress whispered against her legs when she walked, the silk impossibly soft after months of rough wool and borrowed rags. "You look beautiful." She spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Adrian stood at the garden entrance, and the expression on his face made something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. "I look ridiculous," she said, smoothing her hands down the skirt. "This dress probably costs more than most people make in a year." Good. Adrian moved toward her, and she caught that pine and rain scent that made her wolf whimper with longing. You deserve beautiful things. I don't. Don't. The word was gentle but firm. Don't tell me what you don't deserve, Lyra. I'm tired of hearing you diminish yourself. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something in his tone warned her that this wasn't a battle she would win. The gardens are lovely, she said instead, gesturing at the roses that climbed the stone walls around them. Do you come here often? Every day. Adrian fell into step beside her as they began walking down a gravel path lined with lavender. My mother planted most of these. After she died, the gardeners wanted to replace them with something more formal. I wouldn't let them. She had good taste. She would have liked you. The words were quiet, almost thoughtful, but they hit Lyra like a physical blow. She stopped walking, her breath catching. You don't know that. I do. Adrian stopped too, turning to face her. She always said the most beautiful flowers were the ones that survived the harshest winters, the ones that looked delicate but had roots strong enough to weather any storm. Lyra's throat felt tight. I'm not strong. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes. Lyra, you've been alone for 6 months, cast out by your own pack, rejected by everyone you tried to trust, and you're still here, still fighting, still alive. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. I'm scared, she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared that this is all some kind of mistake or dream or cruel joke. I'm scared that tomorrow you'll realize what I really am and send me away. And what are you really? She looked down at her hands, twisted together in the silk of her skirt. Nobody. Look at me. When she didn't, he touched her chin, tilting her face up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. His fingers were warm against her skin, and she could feel calluses from years of sword work. You are not nobody, he said, each word deliberate and firm. You are the woman who survived 6 months on her own because she was too stubborn to give up. You are the woman who still has compassion for others even after the world showed her none. You are the woman who sits with me at breakfast every morning and makes me remember what laughter sounds like. Adrian. His name came out broken. You are the woman I've been waiting for my entire life, even when I didn't know I was waiting. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, so tight she gasped. For a moment, the world around them seemed to blur at the edges, leaving only Adrian's face, only the warmth of his touch, only the impossible sincerity in his voice. I don't understand, she breathed. You don't have to, not yet. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she realized she was crying. All you have to do is stay. Can you do that? What if I'm not strong enough? For what? For this, for you, for... She gestured helplessly at the palace rising behind them, at the dress she wore, at the life he was offering her. What if I disappoint you? Something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. Impossible. You don't know. I know enough. His other hand came up to frame her face, his touch gentle but certain. I know you're brave and kind and resilient. I know you make me feel things I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. I know that when you smile, really smile, it's like the sun coming up. Adrian. She couldn't seem to say anything else, his name the only word that made sense anymore. I know that every instinct I have as a wolf and as a man tells me that you belong here, with me, and I know that I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe it too. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its certainty. Lyra felt her walls crumbling, the defences she'd built over months of rejection and pain starting to crack under the steady warmth of his conviction. I've never had anyone believe in me before, she whispered. You have someone now. Before she could lose her courage, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was meant to be quick, just a brush of mouth against mouth, but the moment their lips touched, something electric shot through her. Adrian made a soft sound against her mouth, his hands sliding into her hair, and suddenly she was drowning in sensation. He tasted like coffee and promises, like safety and wildness all at once. The golden thread in her chest sang so loudly she thought the whole world must be able to hear it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "Lyra," he murmured, her name rough on his lips. "I'm scared," she said again, but this time it felt different, less like a weakness and more like honesty. "I know." His hands were still in her hair, his touch anchor steady. "But you don't have to be scared alone anymore." They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. The garden around them was quiet except for the distant sound of water from a fountain and the soft buzz of bees in the lavender. "Adrian!" a voice called from the direction of the palace. They sprang apart, and Lyra felt heat flood her cheeks as a man in formal livery approached. She recognized him as one of Adrian's advisers, though she couldn't remember his name. "Your Majesty," the man said, bowing. His eyes flicked to Lyra, and she caught something in his expression that made her stomach clench. "I apologize for the interruption, but there's been a development that requires your immediate attention." "Can it wait?" "I'm afraid not, sire." The adviser's gaze lingered on Lyra again, and this time she was certain she saw disapproval. "It concerns the arrangements you've been making for your guest." Guest, not lady, not even by name. The dismissal in the word was subtle, but unmistakable. "What arrangements?" Adrian's voice had gone cold. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Anything you need to say to me can be said in front of Lady Lyra." The adviser's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Very well. Word has reached the court about your dining companion. There have been questions raised about the propriety of elevating a servant." "A lady under my protection," Adrian corrected, his voice deadly quiet. "Of course, Your Majesty. But some of the pack elders feel that perhaps a more traditional approach to your choice of companions might be—" "Are you telling me who I can and cannot spend time with?" The temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lyra took an instinctive step back, sudden fear crawling up her spine. This was what she'd been afraid of. This was why she didn't belong here. "Not at all, sire. We simply want to ensure that you're aware of the concerns being raised." "What concerns specifically?" The adviser glanced at Lyra again, and she saw pity in his eyes now. Pity, which was somehow worse than disapproval. Questions about her background, her banishment, whether she can be trusted in such close proximity to the crown. The words hit her like physical blows. She felt herself shrinking, the confidence Adrian had built in her crumbling under the weight of familiar shame. "Get out." The words were so quiet Lyra almost missed them, but the adviser heard them clearly enough. "Your Majesty?" "I said get out." Adrian's voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now that made Lyra's wolf want to bare her throat in submission. "And tell whoever sent you to bring their concerns to me directly, if they have the courage. Otherwise, they can keep their opinions to themselves." The adviser bowed stiffly and retreated, but not before giving Lyra one last look that seemed to say, "You see, you don't belong here." When they were alone again, Adrian turned to her, and the fury in his eyes was breathtaking. "Don't," he said before she could speak. "Don't you dare let them make you feel small." But it was too late. The damage was done, and they both knew it. The magic of the garden, of the kiss, of the moment they'd shared, it all felt fragile now, tainted by reality. "They're not wrong," she said quietly. "I am a servant. I was banished. People have a right to be concerned about—" "No." Adrian stepped toward her, and she could see the wolf in his eyes now, golden and fierce. "They have no right to judge you. They don't know you." "But they know my history." "They know lies." His hands clenched at his sides. "They know gossip and assumptions and prejudice. They don't know that you're brave enough to survive on your own for 6 months. They don't know that you're generous enough to worry about whether you deserve kindness. They don't know that you make me feel human again for the first time in 23 years. Her breath caught. Adrian. Stay, he said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. Whatever doubts they put in your head, whatever fears they dredge up, stay. Let me show them who you really are. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had changed her world in the space of a few days. This king who knelt in kitchen doorways and shared his loneliness and kissed her like she was precious. Okay, she whispered. Relief flooded his features. Okay, I'll stay. The words felt like jumping off a cliff. I'm still scared, but I'll stay. This time, when he kissed her, it felt like a promise. The scent hit her first. Lyra was walking through the palace corridors toward the library where she and Adrian were supposed to meet for their afternoon reading when it crashed into her like a physical blow. Pack scent. Familiar and wrong and thick with the kind of dominance that made her wolf whimper and cower. Her former pack was here. She stopped so abruptly that a passing servant nearly collided with her, her hand flying to her throat as panic clawed its way up from her chest. Run! Every instinct screamed at her. Run now, before they see you. But her feet felt rooted to the marble floor, and all she could do was stand there and shake as memories crashed over her. The cold morning they dragged her from her bed. The circle of faces hard and unforgiving as they accused her of theft. The sound of her cousin's gasp when the necklace had appeared in her belongings, perfectly planted. The feeling of pack bonds snapping one by one until she was nothing but a hollow shell standing alone in the woods. Lady Lyra? Marcus appeared at her elbow, concern creasing his weathered features. Are you quite all right? You look pale. She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. The scent was getting stronger, which meant they were getting closer, and she needed to move. She needed to hide. She needed to disappear before... Well, look what we have here. The voice was exactly as she remembered it, cold, cruel, amused in a way that promised pain. She turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach like ice water, and there he was. Alpha Marcus of the Crescent Moon Pack, her former Alpha, standing in the palace corridor like he owned it. Behind him were two of his enforcers and, "Hello, cousin." Beta Sarah stepped out from behind her father, and the smile on her lips was sharp enough to cut glass. She was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful. Golden hair that caught the light, blue eyes that sparkled with malice, a figure that drew attention and held it. She was also the woman who had destroyed Lyra's life. "Surprised to see us?" Sarah continued, her voice honey-sweet and venomous. "When we heard that a certain thief had made her way into the royal court, we simply had to come pay our respects." Lyra's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I didn't steal anything." Alpha Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Still telling that story, are you? How charming." "It's not a story." The words came out stronger than she'd expected, fueled by months of suppressed rage. "Someone planted that necklace in my things, and we all know who." Sarah's eyes widened in mock innocence. "Are you accusing me of something, dear cousin?" "I'm stating a fact." "Careful," Alpha Marcus said, his voice dropping to a growl that made Lyra's wolf try to submit automatically. "You're speaking to the future Luna of our pack. Show some respect." Future Luna. Of course. Sarah had probably been planning this for years, frame the weak, unwanted cousin for theft, clear the way for her own ascension, and secure her position without any inconvenient competition. "She owes a debt to our pack," Alpha Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on Lyra like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "Damages for the theft, plus interest for the months she's been evading justice." "I didn't steal. The debt stands. She comes with us, or we'll be forced to pursue more formal channels of justice." The threat was clear. Cooperate, or they'd make this a political incident that could damage relations between packs. They'd trap Adrian between protecting her and protecting his kingdom's alliances, and they were counting on her being too weak, too broken, too convinced of her own worthlessness to fight back. For a moment, standing there in that corridor with the scent of her former pack thick in her nose, Lyra almost believed them, almost fell back into the familiar pattern of submission and shame that had defined the first 22 years of her life. Then she heard footsteps behind her, measured, confident, and carrying with them a scent of pine and rain that made the golden thread in her chest sing. "Is there a problem here?" Adrian's voice was perfectly polite, but there was something underneath it that made Alpha Marcus take an involuntary step back, something that whispered of power held in careful check, of a predator choosing to appear civilized. "Your Majesty!" Alpha Marcus recovered quickly, bowing with just enough respect to avoid outright insult. "Allow me to introduce myself. Alpha Marcus of the Crescent Moon Pack. This is my daughter, Beta Sera." "I know who you are." Adrian moved to stand beside Lyra, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "The question is why you're in my palace threatening one of my guests." "Threatening." Alpha Marcus's laugh was too loud, too forced. "Merely discussing a family matter, Your Majesty. This young woman owes a debt to our pack. Lady Lyra owes nothing to anyone." The correction was so quiet it was almost conversational, but something in Adrian's tone made the temperature in the corridor drop 10 degrees. "Your Majesty," Sera stepped forward, her voice pitched to sound reasonable and concerned. "Perhaps you're not aware of her history. She was banished from our pack for theft. We have witnesses, evidence." "You have lies." Adrian's voice was still quiet, still perfectly controlled, but Lyra could see the wolf in his eyes now, golden and fierce and absolutely lethal. "I'm sorry." Alpha Marcus's voice held a warning. "Are you calling us liars?" "I'm stating a fact." Adrian stepped forward, and suddenly the corridor felt too small to contain him. "Lady Lyra told me about your pack's accusations. She also told me about how conveniently those accusations allowed certain people to advance their positions." Sera's face went white. "I don't know what she's told you." "The truth." Adrian's gaze shifted to her, and Lyra saw her cousin actually flinch. "Which is more than your pack has heard in some time, apparently." "You don't understand," Alpha Marcus said, and for the first time he sounded uncertain. "Our alliance with your kingdom will remain intact as long as you remember your place." The authority in Adrian's voice was absolute now, the kind that made Alphas bow and Betas bare their throats. "Which is not in my palace, making demands about my guests." "She's not your guest," Sera snapped, her composure finally cracking. "She's a thief and a liar, and a pathetic excuse for a wolf who—" "Enough!" The word cracked like a whip, echoing off the stone walls and making everyone in the corridor freeze. Adrian took another step forward, and the power rolling off him now was unmistakable. This was not just a king. This was an alpha in the truest sense of the word, apex predator, ultimate authority, the kind of dominant force that could bring entire packs to their knees with a look. "You will not speak about Lady Lyra that way," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "You will not look at her that way. You will not breathe in her direction without permission." "Your Majesty," Alpha Marcus tried again, but there was desperation in his voice now. "Surely you can understand." "I understand that you cast out an innocent woman based on lies. I understand that you allowed the real thief to frame her cousin for personal gain. I understand that you came to my palace expecting to intimidate her into submission because you think she's still the frightened girl you threw away." Adrian moved to stand directly in front of Lyra, not hiding her but shielding her, his presence a wall of protective fury between her and her accusers. "But she's not that girl anymore," he continued. "She is Lady Lyra, under my personal protection. She sits at my table. She walks in my gardens. She has my complete trust and faith." He paused, his gaze shifting between Alpha Marcus and Sera. "And she has something else." What? Sarah whispered. Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. My heart. The words hit the corridor like a thunderclap. Lyra felt her breath stop entirely, the golden thread in her chest pulling so tight she thought it might lift her off her feet. Which means, Adrian continued conversationally, that any insult to her is an insult to me. Any threat against her is a threat against the crown. Any attempt to harm her will be met with the full force of royal justice. He took one final step forward, and Alpha Marcus actually stumbled backward. Now, you have two choices. You can apologize to Lady Lyra for the lies your pack told about her, for the pain you caused her, and for daring to darken my doorway with your presence. Or you can be escorted from my territory and told never to return. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Lyra could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, could smell the fear sweat beginning to bloom on Alpha Marcus's skin. Alpha Marcus started, then stopped. His gaze flicked between Adrian's face and the very real threat of royal displeasure. We may have been hasty in our judgment. Is that an apology? Adrian's voice was silky with menace. We apologize for any misunderstanding. It wasn't much, it wasn't enough, but it was the first time anyone from her former pack had ever admitted to being wrong about anything, and Lyra felt something loosening in her chest that had been tight for 6 long months. Good. Adrian stepped back, his hand finding Lyra's and lacing their fingers together. Marcus will escort you out, and Marcus, if I ever see any of them on my territory again without invitation, I'll take it as an act of aggression. The threat was clear. Leave now, or face the consequences. Alpha Marcus bowed stiffly, his face flushed with humiliation. Sarah looked like she wanted to say something else, but one look at Adrian's expression made her think better of it. They left without another word, their scent fading gradually from the corridor until only the familiar warmth of home remained. When they were finally alone, Adrian turned to face her, and the concern in his eyes nearly undid her completely. Are you all right? She stared at him for a long moment, this man who had just faced down her former pack, who had claimed her publicly, who had called her precious in front of witnesses. You said I had your heart. Something vulnerable flickered across his features. I meant it. But we've only known each other for a lifetime, he said quietly. I've known you for a lifetime, Lyra. I just didn't know I was looking for you until I found you. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its certainty. I love you, she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Relief flooded his features like sunrise. Thank God, he breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, and she was drowning in the taste of him, the feel of him, the impossible reality that this strong, beautiful, powerful man loved her back. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. You're mine, he murmured against her lips, always mine. Always yours, she agreed. And for the first time in 6 months, Lyra believed it. The crown room was silent except for the sound of Lyra's breathing. She stood before the mirror, staring at the woman looking back at her. The dress was white silk that seemed to flow like water, embroidered with silver threads that caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Her dark hair had been arranged in an intricate style that somehow managed to look both regal and soft. Tiny diamonds scattered through it like stars. She looked like a queen. The thought should have terrified her. A week ago, it would have sent her running for the nearest exit. But now, standing here in the room where Adrian's ancestors had been crowned for centuries, all she felt was a deep, settled certainty. You're ready. She turned to find Adrian standing in the doorway, and her breath caught. He wore formal ceremonial dress, deep blue velvet with silver threading, a circlet of white gold resting on his dark hair. He was beautiful and powerful and hers, and the golden thread in her chest sang at the sight of him. Are you? She asked quietly. Ready, I mean. Something soft and vulnerable flickered across his features. "I've been ready my whole life. The question is whether you are." She considered that, turning back to look at herself in the mirror one more time. 7 days had passed since the confrontation with her former pack. 7 days of quiet conversations and shared meals and moments that felt like coming home. 7 days of Adrian patiently answering her questions about what it would mean to be his queen, what the kingdom would expect from her, what their life together would look like. 7 days of growing more certain with each sunrise that this was where she belonged. What if I'm not strong enough? The question slipped out before she could stop it, an echo of old fears that died hard. Adrian moved to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "Do you remember what you told me yesterday about the wolf pup you found behind the kitchens?" She nodded. She'd discovered the small creature hiding there, thin and frightened, clearly abandoned. Without thinking, she'd coaxed it out with food and gentle words, spending hours sitting perfectly still until it trusted her enough to let her help. "You said it reminded you of yourself," Adrian continued, his voice soft, lost and scared and convinced it wasn't worth saving. But it was. The words came out fierce, protective. It just needed someone to see that it mattered. "And what did you do?" "I brought it to the pack healer, made sure it had food and shelter, found it a family who would love it." She paused, understanding beginning to dawn. "I saved it." "You did more than that." Adrian's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "You saw its worth when it couldn't see it itself. You fought for it when it was too weak to fight. You gave it a home when it had nowhere to go." Their eyes met in the mirror, and she saw her own realization reflected in his gaze. "That's what strength looks like, Lyra. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Not being invulnerable, but being willing to be vulnerable for something that matters." "And you think I have that?" "I know you do." He leaned down to press a kiss to the crown of her head, careful not to disturb the careful arrangement of her hair. "I've seen you face down a pack that cast you out. I've seen you choose trust when everything in your experience told you to run. I've seen you open your heart when it would have been safer to keep it closed." She turned in his arms, and the certainty in his eyes took her breath away. "I've seen you be brave every single day since I found you picking through kitchen scraps," he said quietly, "and that was before you had a crown, before you had a kingdom supporting you, before you had me standing beside you." "What if they don't accept me?" "They already have." Adrian's smile was soft and sure. "Do you know what the pack elders said when I told them I wanted to make you my queen?" She shook her head. "They said it was about time I chose someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. Someone who wouldn't take the crown for granted because she knew what it was like to have nothing." Tears burned behind her eyes. "They said that?" "Elder Margaret said you had spine and sense, which from her is practically a love letter." Adrian's smile widened. "And Elder Thomas said any woman brave enough to slap down Alpha Marcus in public was exactly what this kingdom needed." "I didn't slap him down, you did that. You stood your ground. You didn't cower or run or apologize for existing. You let me defend you, but you never stopped defending yourself." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over. "That's a queen, Lyra. Someone who knows her worth and refuses to let others diminish it." She looked at him for a long moment, this man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to love her anyway. This king who had given her not just a home, but a purpose. This wolf who made her feel like she could be anything, do anything, become anything. "Ask me," she said quietly. "Ask you what?" "Ask me properly, the way a king should ask a woman to be his queen." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like joy. He stepped back, then slowly, deliberately, sank to one knee before her. "Lyra of no pack, survivor of hardship, keeper of my heart," he said, his voice formal but warm with love. Will you do me the honour of becoming my queen? Will you rule beside me, stand with me, build a future with me? Will you let me love you for the rest of our lives?" The words she wanted to say stuck in her throat for a moment, too big and bright and overwhelming to voice. Then she found them, and they came out clear and certain and true. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you. Yes to us. Yes to whatever comes next." The smile that spread across Adrian's face was brilliant enough to light the entire kingdom. He rose and kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise, and when they broke apart, the crown room didn't feel like an echo of the past anymore. It felt like the beginning of the future. "Are you ready now?" he asked against her lips. "I'm ready." They walked to the great hall hand in hand, and when the doors opened, Lyra saw the assembled court waiting for them. Hundreds of faces, all turned toward her, all waiting to see what she would become. For a moment, the old panic tried to rise. The voice that whispered she didn't belong here, would never belong here, was just a pretender wearing borrowed clothes and living a borrowed life. Then Adrian squeezed her hand, and she remembered everything he'd said, everything she'd survived, everything she'd learned about her own strength in the week since he'd found her. She wasn't the frightened girl who had been cast out by her pack. She wasn't the desperate woman picking through kitchen scraps. She was Lyra, soon to be queen of the Western Territories, mate to the Alpha King, and she had earned her place here through fire and pain and the choice to keep fighting when everything told her to give up. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and symbolic gestures. Adrian spoke vows that made her heart race and her eyes fill with tears. She spoke her own promises back to him, her voice growing stronger with each word. When the ceremonial crown was placed on her head, lighter than she'd expected, warm from the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows, the assembled court erupted in cheers that echoed off the stone walls. "My queen," Adrian murmured against her ear as they stood together, hands clasped, facing their people. "My king," she whispered back. And when he kissed her in front of the entire court, claiming her publicly and completely, the golden thread in her chest didn't just sing. It soared. Later, much later, when the ceremonies were done and the celebrations had wound down and they were finally alone in their chambers, Adrian found her standing on the balcony looking out over the kingdom. Their kingdom. "Regrets?" he asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, solid and warm and real behind her. "Only one," she said. His arms tightened slightly. "What's that?" "I wish my parents could have seen this." The words came out soft, wistful. "They died when I was young, but they always told me I was meant for something special. I used to think they were just being kind." Maybe they were being prophetic. She turned in his arms, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. Even after everything, even after the vows and the crown and the absolute certainty of belonging to each other, she sometimes couldn't quite believe this was real. "I love you," she said, the words feeling new and precious every time she spoke them. "I love you too." He cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "My queen, my mate, my heart." "My king," she answered, "my home, my everything." When he kissed her this time, it was different from all the kisses before. It was the kiss of a queen and her king, of partners and equals, of two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. It was the kiss of a new beginning, and in the distance, as if the kingdom itself was celebrating, church bells began to ring, their joyful sound carrying on the evening breeze like a promise of all the tomorrows to come. 3 months later, Queen Lyra found herself kneeling on a different kitchen floor. This time, though, she wasn't searching for scraps. She was offering comfort to a young girl who couldn't have been more than 16, her clothes torn and muddy, her eyes wide with the kind of terror that came from having nowhere else to go. It's all right, Lyra said softly, keeping her voice gentle and non-threatening. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. The girl, Mira, she'd whispered when the guards had brought her in, pressed herself further into the corner, her thin frame shaking with exhaustion and fear. I didn't steal anything, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know that's what they said, but I didn't. I would never. Please, I just need somewhere to go. Somewhere safe. The echo of her own words from months ago hit Lyra like a physical blow. She saw herself in this girl's face, the desperate hope warring with resigned despair, the way she held herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible, the bone-deep certainty that she didn't deserve kindness. I believe you, Lyra said simply. Mira's eyes went wide. You do? I do. And even if you had stolen something, which I don't think you did, that wouldn't make you less deserving of help. Lyra settled more comfortably on the floor, making herself as unthreatening as possible. When did you last eat? The question seemed to break something in Mira's composure. Tears spilled over, and she wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. 2 days ago, maybe 3, I found some bread someone had thrown away, but... She trailed off, shame colouring her cheeks. There's no shame in surviving, Lyra said firmly. You did what you had to do. That makes you brave, not weak. She stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and walked to the kitchen counter where a plate of fresh pastries sat cooling. The cook had made them that morning, and Lyra knew he wouldn't begrudge one going to someone who needed it. Here, she said, offering the pastry to Mira. It's still warm. Mira stared at the food, like it might disappear if she looked away, her hands trembling as she reached for it. Thank you, she whispered, and the gratitude in her voice was so profound it made Lyra's throat tight. Don't thank me yet, Lyra said with a smile. Wait until you've had a proper bath and a full meal and a good night's sleep in a real bed. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Next? Well, you can't very well leave, can you? Not until we've figured out who framed you and why. Lyra's voice took on a steely edge that would have surprised the girl who'd been picking through kitchen scraps 3 months ago. No one falsely accuses one of my people and gets away with it. Your people. Anyone who needs sanctuary finds it here. That's the law now. My law. Lyra knelt down again, meeting Mira's eyes. You're under royal protection now, which means you're safe, and we're going to find out the truth about what really happened. Hope bloomed in Mira's expression, tentative but real. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Lyra smiled, remembering a conversation in a garden, a man kneeling beside her and offering her everything. Because someone once helped me when I had nowhere else to go. Because everyone deserves to know they matter. Because you remind me of someone I used to know. Who? Myself. 20 minutes later, Lyra found Adrian in his study, bent over reports from the Northern Territories. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that spread across his face still made her heart skip. How did it go? He asked, setting down his papers and opening his arms for her. She settled into his lap, tucking herself against his chest and breathing in that familiar scent of pine and rain that meant home. She's safe, fed, the maids are drawing her a bath, and I've had a room prepared for her in the East Wing. And the accusations against her? False, just like I thought. Her story has too many similarities to mine to be coincidence. Lyra leaned back to meet his eyes. I want to investigate, quietly, see if we can find out who's really behind the thefts in her pack. Consider it done. Adrian's voice held that edge of steel that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. I'll send Marcus to make some discreet inquiries. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the Queen. Protecting your people is your right, not a favour. The words still gave her a little thrill. Queen. Her. The girl who'd been thrown away like garbage was now someone who could offer sanctuary to others. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, she admitted quietly. Which part? All of it. The crown, the kingdom, the fact that people actually listen when I speak. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. The fact that you love me. Believe it." Adrian's voice was soft but certain. All of it. Every impossible, beautiful bit of it. He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of the kind of love that had rebuilt her from the ground up. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I have something to tell you," she said. Something in her tone made him go still. "What?" "The council meeting this morning, when they asked about expanding the sanctuary program to other territories." "Yes?" I may have gotten a little enthusiastic in my response. Adrian's eyes were dancing now. "How enthusiastic?" "I may have volunteered to personally oversee the expansion, and I may have suggested that any pack leader who has a problem with offering sanctuary to displaced wolves can take it up with me directly." "You declared war on political indifference." "I declared war on people who throw away wolves like they're nothing." The fierceness in her own voice surprised her. No one should have to live the way I lived. No one should have to believe they're worthless because someone else decided they were inconvenient. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, and then he started laughing, rich, delighted laughter that filled the study and spilled out into the corridor beyond. "What?" she demanded. "I was just thinking about what Alpha Marcus would say if he could see you now. The woman he cast out for being weak just declared war on injustice across 3 kingdoms. The thought of her former Alpha's face if he could see her now, crown on her head, power in her voice, a kingdom at her back, sent a warm satisfaction through her chest. "I hope he heard about the coronation," she said with a grin that was probably far too wicked for a queen. "Oh, he did. Marcus made sure of that." Adrian's grin matched hers. Apparently he went very quiet when he got the official announcement. Sarah locked herself in her room for 3 days. Good. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, wrapped up in each other and the impossible reality of their life together. "I love you," Adrian said suddenly. "I love you too." The words still felt like magic. "Even when you laugh at my political declarations." "Especially then." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt the familiar warmth spreading through her chest. "My fierce, protective, world-changing queen." "Your queen," she agreed, "always." Later that evening, after Mira had been settled and fed and tucked safely into bed with promises that tomorrow would bring answers, Lyra found herself walking through the palace gardens. The roses were in full bloom now, their scent heavy in the warm air, and she could hear the soft splash of the fountain in the distance. She wasn't alone. She never was, really. There were always guards nearby, always people who needed her attention, always responsibilities waiting. But for this moment, in this garden where she'd first learned to trust again, she felt the deep, settled peace of someone who had found where they belonged. "Your Majesty?" She turned to find Marcus approaching, his weathered face creased with something that might have been affection. "Just Lyra, Marcus, please." "Lyra, then." He came to stand beside her, both of them looking out over the garden that held so many memories. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For the girl, for giving her sanctuary, for making this palace a place where lost souls can find their way home." The words hit her unexpectedly hard, and she felt tears prick behind her eyes. "She reminded me of someone," she said quietly. "I know." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "If I may say so, Your Majesty, Lyra, you've become everything this kingdom needed, everything the king needed, everything that lost girl in the kitchen needed." "What's that?" "Hope." Before she could respond, familiar arms wrapped around her from behind, and Adrian's voice was warm against her ear. "There you are. I was wondering where you'd gotten to." She leaned back against him, solid and sure and real, and watched the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Just thinking," she said. "About what?" "About how different everything is, how different I am." She paused, considering. "About how sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. Do you regret any of it? The pain, the fear, the months alone?" She thought about it seriously, as she always did when he asked her difficult questions. "No," she said finally, "I wouldn't choose it again, but I can't regret the path that led me here, led me to you, led me to understanding what it means to be strong, to be worthy, to be home. Even the part where I found you stealing scraps?" She turned in his arms, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. "Especially that part," she said, "because that's when I learned that sometimes, when you think you're at the end of everything, you're really at the beginning of something beautiful." He kissed her then, there in the garden where she'd first learned to hope again, and when they broke apart, the future stretched out before them like a promise. A future full of sanctuary offered, and love shared, and lost souls finding their way home. A future where a girl who'd once believed she was nothing had become everything. A future that was theirs. Before we continue, please take 2 seconds to like this video. The palace around them hummed with quiet life, guards on their rounds, servants finishing their evening tasks, the gentle sounds of a kingdom at peace. And in the centre of it all, a king and queen stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars come out over the home they built together. Where are you listening from? Whether you're Team Second Chances or Team Found Family, let's meet in the comments. If you'd like to support more stories like this, please subscribe.